The evening rush at Bellini's had finally slowed down, and Lily Wu's feet were killing her. 12 hours into a double shift, she longed to kick off her black uniform shoes and soak her aching feet. But she needed the money. The fancy Italian restaurant in downtown Chicago charged prices that made her wince, but that meant good tips. Tips that helped pay for both rent and her music classes. Lily glanced at her watch. Just one more hour. She tucked a stray lock of dark hair behind her ear and straightened her posture, a habit from years of piano lessons. Her piano professor would be proud, though he'd probably laugh seeing her balance 4 plates of tiramisu instead of playing Debussy. "Table 7 needs water," called Hector, the head waiter, as he rushed past. "And the boss says we've got a VIP coming in." "He wants you to take it," Lily groaned internally. VIPs at Bellini's were usually demanding businessmen who ordered the most expensive wine while barely looking at the servers. But she couldn't say no, not when the restaurant manager specifically requested her. She was known for handling difficult customers with a calm smile that never faltered, no matter how ridiculous their demands. "Did he say who it is?" she asked, refilling water glasses at table 7. "Some big-shot investor, Thomas Blackwood. Apparently he owns half the buildings on Michigan Avenue." Lily nearly dropped the water pitcher. Everyone in Chicago knew that name. Thomas Blackwood was a self-made millionaire, famous for his ruthless business tactics and extravagant lifestyle. His face regularly appeared in business magazines and local news, usually with headlines about another billion-dollar deal or charity gala. "Why me?" she whispered to Hector when he passed by again. "Because last week when that food critic was here you didn't spill soup on anyone," Hector replied with a wink. "Just smile, nod, and try not to mention you live in an apartment the size of his bathroom." At precisely 9:30 p.m., Thomas Blackwood entered Bellini's. Lily had expected him to arrive with an entourage, but he walked in alone. He was taller than she'd imagined, with silver hair and sharp blue eyes that seemed to evaluate everything they landed on. His suit probably cost more than 6 months of her rent. The restaurant manager practically sprinted across the dining room to greet him, bowing slightly as he led him to the best table in the house, a secluded corner with a view of both the Chicago skyline and the grand piano that sat, mostly for show, near the center of the restaurant. "Your server tonight will be Lily," the manager said, gesturing toward her. "She's one of our finest." Blackwood nodded curtly, not quite looking at her as he took his seat. The manager retreated with another slight bow, shooting Lily a look that clearly said, "Don't mess this up." She approached the table with a practiced smile. "Good evening, Mr. Blackwood. Welcome to Bellini's. May I start you with something to drink?" He looked up from the menu, his blue eyes studying her face with unexpected intensity. "The 1982 Bordeaux. And tell me about the specials, not what's written here." He tapped the menu. "What's actually good tonight?" His direct manner caught her off guard. Most VIPs asked for the most expensive dishes without caring about quality. "The chef's sea bass is exceptional tonight," she said honestly. "He prepares it with a lemon caper sauce that's not too heavy. The risotto is always perfect here, but between us the veal is a bit overrated." A hint of a smile touched Blackwood's lips. "Honesty. Refreshing. I'll have the sea bass." As Lily turned to place his order, the restaurant's piped-in background music changed to something with a heavy electronic beat. Blackwood frowned, his momentary good humor vanishing. "What is this noise they're playing?" he asked when she returned with his wine. "I believe it's what the manager calls modern ambient jazz," Lily replied, carefully pouring the expensive Bordeaux. "He thinks it appeals to younger customers. It sounds like a washing machine with rhythm," Blackwood muttered, taking a sip of wine. His eyebrows rose slightly. Perhaps the wine had passed his test. "This restaurant has a beautiful grand piano sitting there collecting dust, and they play this instead?" Lily glanced at the piano. It was indeed beautiful, a polished ebony Steinway that the owner had purchased years ago as a statement piece. Occasionally on special holidays they hired a pianist, but most days it sat silent. "The piano is mostly for show," she admitted. "I don't think it's been tuned in months." "Criminal," Blackwood said, shaking his head. "When I was growing up, restaurants like this always had live piano music. Real music, not whatever this is." He gestured vaguely at the ceiling where the sound was coming from. Throughout his meal, Blackwood continued to make comments about the music. each observation more irritated than the last. When Lily brought his dessert, a simple vanilla panna cotta, he was staring at the piano with open contempt. "Does anyone here even play?" he asked suddenly. Lily hesitated. She could lie, but something about his direct gaze made her answer truthfully. "I play a little." His eyes narrowed. "Classical?" "Yes," she admitted. "I'm actually studying piano performance at the conservatory." "Part-time," she added quickly. "Part-time?" Blackwood seemed genuinely curious now, his dessert forgotten. "Why part-time?" Lily shifted uncomfortably. She didn't usually share her personal life with customers, especially not millionaires who probably couldn't understand financial struggles. "Full-time tuition is expensive. I work here to pay for classes." Blackwood's expression was unreadable as he considered this information. Then, without warning, he stood up and walked toward the piano. Lily watched in alarm as he lifted the cover, revealing the keys beneath. "Sir, I don't think," she began, but he cut her off with a wave. "I want to hear real music. This," he gestured toward the speakers, "is an insult to a fine dining experience." The restaurant manager appeared as if summoned by magic. "Is there a problem, Mr. Blackwood?" "Yes," Blackwood said firmly. "Your background music is terrible, and you have a perfectly good piano sitting unused." The manager looked panicked. "We don't have a pianist scheduled tonight, but I can certainly change the music selection." "Your server says she plays," Blackwood interrupted, pointing at Lily. The few remaining diners were watching now. Curious about the commotion, the manager turned to Lily with wide eyes. "You play piano?" Lily felt her cheeks flush. "I study at the conservatory, but I couldn't possibly. I'm on shift and I'll pay for her time," Blackwood said decisively. "Consider it a special request." The manager's expression shifted instantly from panic to forced enthusiasm. "Of course. What a wonderful idea. Lily, why didn't you tell us about your talents?" Caught between her boss's expectant look and Blackwood's challenging stare, Lily felt trapped. She hadn't performed in public for months. Her practice time had been limited by long shifts and exhaustion. Her hands were tired from carrying trays, not limber for playing. "The piano probably needs tuning," she tried weakly. "Then play something that won't suffer from a slightly out-of-tune piano," Blackwood countered, his tone making it clear he wouldn't back down. The manager was nodding enthusiastically now. "Yes, just a song or two. What a treat for our guests." Lily looked around the restaurant. The remaining customers were watching with interest. Her fellow servers had paused their work to see what was happening. Hector gave her an encouraging thumbs up from across the room. "Just one piece," she finally conceded, untying her apron and handing it to Hector. As she approached the piano, Lily felt a familiar mix of dread and excitement. Performance anxiety had been her constant companion since childhood, intensifying after a disastrous recital 2 years ago that had shaken her confidence badly. She sat on the bench, surprised to find it properly adjusted for someone her height. The keys felt cool under her fingertips as she tested a few notes. The piano was indeed slightly out of tune, but not terribly so. Blackwood stood nearby, arms crossed, waiting. "What will you play?" he asked. Lily considered her options. Something simple would be safer, but something told her Blackwood would be unimpressed by simplicity. He had thrown down a challenge, and despite her exhaustion and nerves, a part of her wanted to meet it. "Chopin," she decided. "Nocturne in E-flat major." A flicker of surprise crossed Blackwood's face. Perhaps he hadn't expected her to choose something so technically demanding. The restaurant had gone completely quiet, the manager having finally turned off the offensive background music. Lily closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and began to play. The first notes floated into the air, tentative at first, then gaining confidence. She hadn't played this piece in public before, only in practice rooms and for her professor. It was a piece that required both technical skill and emotional depth. Quiet passages that could expose every flaw, and louder sections that demanded passion. As she played, the restaurant, her aching feet, even Blackwood himself seemed to fade away. There was only the music, bittersweet and haunting. Her fingers remembered what her conscious mind sometimes forgot, finding the right keys even when doubt tried to creep in. When the final notes faded, Lily opened her eyes, suddenly aware of the complete silence in the restaurant. For a moment, nobody moved. Then applause erupted, not just polite clapping, but enthusiastic appreciation. Diners who had been ignoring each other over their phones were smiling and looking at her with genuine admiration. Blackwood wasn't applauding. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read, surprise mixed with something else.
Curiosity?
Respe. Not bad, he said when she returned to his table, which from him seemed like high praise. Who's your teacher? Professor Chen at the conservatory, she answered, still feeling slightly dazed from the performance and the warm reception. Blackwood nodded as if the name meant something to him. And you're working here instead of performing because? The bluntness of the question took her aback. Reality, she answered honestly. Concert pianists are rare. Waitresses are needed everywhere. He considered this, then pulled out a business card and scribbled something on the back. I'm hosting a charity event next Friday at the Grand Hotel. The pianist I hired just canceled. Be there at 7, smart attire. You'll be paid, of course. It wasn't a request but a statement, delivered with the confidence of someone not used to hearing no. I have a shift that night, Lily stammered. I'll speak to your manager. Blackwood stood, leaving a tip that made her eyes widen. Don't be late.
And practice the Rachmaninoff preludes.
I'm particularly fond of Op 23, number 5. As he walked away, Lily looked down at the business card in her hand, wondering if she had imagined the whole encounter. But the card was real, heavy cardstock with embossed lettering, and on the back, in sharp handwriting, L. Wu Piano, Friday, 7 p.m. Her life, she sensed, had just taken an unexpected turn. Lily stared at the business card for the 5th time that day, running her thumb over the embossed lettering. Thomas Blackwood, CEO, Blackwood Investments. It had been 3 days since the Millionaire had challenged her to play at his charity event, and she still couldn't believe it had actually happened. Earth to Lily, called Hector, snapping his fingers near her face. Table 9 needs their check and you're daydreaming again. She quickly tucked the card back into her apron pocket. Sorry, on it. The restaurant had been buzzing with gossip since her impromptu performance. Regular customers now asked if the piano girl was working, and her tips had actually improved. The manager had even hinted at making live piano music a regular feature, with her as the performer. For exposure rather than actual pay, of course. After her shift ended, Lily hurried to catch the L train to the conservatory. She had managed to book a practice room for 2 hours. Not nearly enough time to prepare for Blackwood's event, but it was all she could get on short notice. Professor Chen was leaving his office as she rushed down the hallway. Lily, I was hoping to see you, he called out, his kind face lighting up. In his 70s, with wire-rimmed glasses and perpetually ink-stained fingers from marking scores, he had been her mentor since she first arrived in Chicago. Professor, I have the most unbelievable news, she said, slightly out of breath. Thomas Blackwood came to the restaurant and he asked me to play at his charity event this Friday. Professor Chen's eyebrows shot up. Thomas Blackwood, the businessman. When she nodded, he let out a low whistle. His events are attended by some very influential people in the arts. How did this happen? As Lily explained the restaurant encounter, Professor Chen's expression shifted from surprise to thoughtfulness. When she mentioned Rachmaninoff, he actually laughed. He doesn't start small, does he? Up 23, number 5 is demanding. Lily bit her lip. Do you think I'm ready for something like this? The old professor considered her question seriously. Technically, yes, you've always had the hands for Rachmaninoff, but there's something holding you back. The same thing that's been holding you back since the disaster at the Wilton competition. Lily winced at the memory. 2 years ago, she had frozen mid-performance at an important competition, her mind going completely blank after a memory slip. She had stumbled off the stage in humiliation, and though she had continued her studies, something in her confidence had been permanently damaged. I know, she sighed, but this could be a real opportunity. Blackwood knows people. Professor Chen nodded. It could indeed. That's why I want you to use my private studio until Friday. It has a better piano than the practice rooms and you won't be interrupted. Lily's eyes widened. Really? But you never let students— you're not just any student, he said simply. And opportunities like this don't come along often. 6 hours a day until Friday. I'll rearrange my schedule. The next 3 days passed in a blur of practice sessions. Lily called in sick to the restaurant, knowing she couldn't manage both work and preparation. She couldn't afford to lose the income, but she also couldn't afford to embarrass herself in front of Blackwood and his guests. The Rachmaninoff prelude was challenging, powerful and passionate, with rapid chord progressions that stretched her hands to their limits. But as she practiced, something shifted. The music began to flow through her in a way she hadn't experienced since before the competition disaster. Perhaps it was the pressure, or perhaps it was simply time, but her fingers remembered their purpose. By Friday afternoon, Lily was as ready as she would ever be. She stood in her tiny apartment, staring at her limited wardrobe with despair. Blackwood had said smart attire, but her nicest outfit was the black pants and white shirt she wore for work. Her phone buzzed with a text from her roommate Zoe. "Package came for you. Looks fancy." When Lily got home, she found a large box with the logo of an expensive downtown boutique. Inside was a simple but elegant black dress, classic and timeless, with a small note, "For tonight." A pianist should look the part. T. Blackwood. She stared at the dress in disbelief. How had he known her size? How had he gotten her address? The questions were unsettling, but the gesture itself left her conflicted. Was it thoughtful or presumptuous? Either way, she had nothing else appropriate to wear. The Grand Hotel lived up to its name. The ballroom where the charity event was being held glittered with crystal chandeliers, and Lily felt distinctly out of place as she made her way through the crowd of Chicago's elite. Women dripped with jewelry that probably cost more than her entire year's tuition, while men in perfectly tailored suits discussed stock portfolios and real estate developments. The grand piano waited on a small stage at the front of the room. At least that part felt familiar, a Steinway concert grand polished to a mirror shine. Lily ran her fingers lightly over the keys when no one was watching. Perfectly tuned, "You came." She turned to find Blackwood standing behind her, impeccable in a tailored tuxedo. Up close, she noticed the fine lines around his eyes, evidence that his wealth hadn't shielded him from life's stresses. "You didn't think I would?" she asked. "People surprise me, Ms. Wu, usually by disappointing me. I'm glad to see you're an exception." He glanced at the dress. "It fits well. Thank you for sending it," she said carefully. "Though I'm curious how you knew my size in a dress." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "When you're in my position, information is easily acquired. Don't worry, I simply called your manager. He was quite helpful once he knew who was asking." Of course, the manager would have her information on file and would have tripped over himself to assist Blackwood. "The event begins in 30 minutes, Blackwood continued. "You'll play during the cocktail hour, then again after dinner. I've put together a program." He handed her a printed sheet. "I assume these pieces are in your repertoire." Lily scanned the list. Bach, Chopin, Debussy, and of course Rachmaninoff. All pieces she knew, thankfully, though some better than others. "Yes, I can play these," she said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "Good. One more thing." Blackwood's voice dropped slightly. "There's someone here tonight you should meet. Diane Reynolds, the director of the Chicago Symphony Orchestra's Young Artist Program." Lily's heart skipped a beat. The Young Artist Program was highly competitive, offering full scholarships and performance opportunities that could launch real careers. "Why would you?" "Because talent without opportunity is a waste," he interrupted. "And I hate waste." Before she could respond, he was called away by an elderly couple who clearly wanted his attention. Lily was left alone with the program, the piano, and a growing sense that tonight was more significant than she had realized. As guests began to arrive in earnest, Lily took her place at the piano. The ambient chatter swelled as the room filled, making her even more nervous. In the restaurant, people hadn't been expecting music. Here they would be listening, judging. She caught sight of Professor Chen slipping into the ballroom, looking somewhat out of place in his old suit. Blackwood must have invited him too. The professor gave her an encouraging nod. Taking a deep breath, she began to play. She started with Bach. Clean, precise, mathematical. The notes flowed more easily than she expected, her hours of practice paying off. As she moved into a Chopin nocturne, she dared to look up at the crowd. To her surprise, people were actually listening. Conversations had quieted, and many guests were watching her with genuine interest. Near the back of the room, she spotted a woman in a deep blue dress observing her intently. Diane Reynolds, perhaps? During a brief break, Blackwood appeared at her side with a glass of water. "You're doing well," he said. "But you're playing too safely." Lily blinked, taken aback. "I'm playing the notes as written. Yes, and with technical precision. But music isn't just notes, is it? You're holding something back. He set the water down beside her. The Rachmaninoff is after dinner. Don't just play it, feel it. His words stung, mostly because she knew he was right. She had been playing correctly but cautiously, afraid of making a mistake in front of this Sophie. Staccated audience. The dinner portion of the evening passed in a blur. Lily picked at an exquisite meal she was too nervous to enjoy, seated at a table with Professor Chen and several patrons of the arts whose names she immediately forgot. The professor kept the conversation flowing when her nerves made her quiet. "He's testing you," Professor Chen whispered when they had a moment alone. "Blackwood. This isn't just about tonight's performance, and what do you mean? I've made some inquiries. He funds several art scholarships anonymously. I think he's evaluating whether to support you." Lily frowned. "I don't need charity." "It's not charity to invest in talent," the professor said firmly. "And pride makes a poor companion when you're working double shifts instead of practicing." As coffee was served, Blackwood returned to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your generosity tonight. We've raised over $200,000 for children's music education." Polite applause followed. To close our evening, Ms. Lily Wu will perform Rachmaninoff's Prelude in G minor. All eyes turned to her as she made her way back to the piano. The Rachmaninoff piece was demanding, passionate and technically challenging with dramatic dynamic contrasts. As she sat at the bench, she remembered Blackwood's critique. Don't just play it, feel it. Her hands hovered over the keys. The familiar fear crept in. What if she failed like at the Wilton competition? What if her mind went blank again? The room seemed suddenly too warm, the audience too expectant. Then she saw Professor Chen's encouraging smile, and beside him, Blackwood watching with that measuring gaze. He had challenged her at the restaurant, and she had surprised him. Perhaps she could surprise him again. She closed her eyes briefly, then began to play. The opening chords rang out dramatically, and she felt something shift inside her. This time she didn't just play the notes, she surrendered to them. Every frustration of the past years, every joy, every struggle poured through her fingers. The music swelled and receded like waves, and Lily rode them without fear. When she struck the final chord, there was a moment of complete silence. Then the room erupted in applause, real, enthusiastic applause, not just polite acknowledgement. As she stood to bow, she caught Blackwood's eye. For the first time, he was smiling, a real smile that transformed his usually stern face. And Lily knew, with sudden clarity, that her life was about to change. The morning after the charity event, Lily woke to the sound of her phone buzzing. Groggily, she reached for it, expecting a text from Zoe asking how the evening had gone. Instead, she found 3 missed calls from Professor Chen, 2 from Bellini's manager, and a text from an unknown number. Breakfast. Carlisle Hotel, 9 a.m. TB Lily sat up quickly, glancing at the time. 8:15. Blackwood's invitation left no room for refusal, just as before. Part of her was annoyed at his presumption, but curiosity won out. She showered and dressed in record time, choosing simple jeans and a sweater since she doubted her work clothes or the borrowed evening gown would be appropriate. The Carlisle was another of Chicago's luxury hotels, though smaller and more exclusive than the Grand. Lily felt underdressed as she entered the elegant lobby with its marble floors and crystal chandeliers. The concierge looked her up and down with barely disguised judgment. "I'm meeting Mr. Blackwood," she said, lifting her chin slightly. The man's demeanor changed instantly. "Of course, Mr. Blackwood is in the private dining room. Please follow me." She was led through the main restaurant to a small room overlooking a garden. Blackwood sat alone at a table set for 2, reading something on a tablet. He looked up as she entered, setting the device aside. "You're punctual. I appreciate that." "You didn't leave much room for negotiation," Lily replied, taking the seat across from him. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I find it saves time. Coffee?" Without waiting for her answer, he signaled to a hovering waiter who poured coffee into her cup. The rich aroma made her stomach growl. She'd been too nervous to eat before leaving her apartment. "Order whatever you like," Blackwood said, gesturing to the menu. "Their pancakes are excellent." Lily glanced at the prices and nearly choked. $28 for pancakes. She ordered them anyway, figuring if Blackwood was paying, she might as well enjoy it. You surprised a lot of people last night, he said after the waiter left, including me. Is that why I'm here? For a performance review over $28 pancakes? Blackwood leaned back, studying her with those sharp blue eyes. You're direct, good, so am I. You're here because I'm curious about you. Why? Because talent like yours is rare. But what's even more rare is seeing someone with your level of talent serving pasta at Bellini's. Lily stirred her coffee, unsure how to respond. Not everyone who has talent gets opportunities. True. Which brings me to why I asked you here. Blackwood picked up his tablet again, sliding it across the table to her. Read this. On the screen was an email from Diane Reynolds, the Chicago Symphony Orchestra director Blackwood had mentioned. Lily scanned it quickly, her heart beating faster with each line. Most impressive young pianist I've heard in years. Technical skill and emotional maturity. Would like to offer her a place in our Young Artists program immediately. Full scholarship. Stipend for living expenses. She looked up, stunned. Is this real? Very. Diane was impressed. So was everyone else. Blackwood took the tablet back. There's more. Professor Chen tells me you're 3 credits short of your degree because you can't afford the tuition for your final semester. Lily frowned. He shouldn't have shared that. He cares about your future. As do I now. Blackwood pushed an envelope across the table. Consider it an investment, not charity. Inside was a check that made Lily's eyes widen. It would cover not just her remaining tuition, but her rent for months. I can't accept this, she said automatically. Why not? Because I don't understand why you would do this. You don't even know me. The waiter arrived with her pancakes, momentarily interrupting their conversation. When he left, Blackwood leaned forward, his expression serious. Let me tell you something about myself that isn't in the business magazines, Ms. Wu. I grew up poor in South Chicago. My mother cleaned houses for the wealthy. My father died when I was 7. When I was about 10, one of my mother's employers discovered I had an aptitude for math. He paid for me to attend a good school, then college. Lily listened, surprised by this glimpse into his background. Nothing in his polished demeanor suggested such humble beginnings. That investment changed my life, he continued. I'm not a sentimental man, but I believe in paying forward what was done for me. I've quietly funded scholarships for years. Usually I let foundations handle it, but occasionally I get personally involved. Why me? Because I played piano at your charity event? Blackwood shook his head. Because you played Chopin in a restaurant after a double shift, for no reason except that I challenged you. Because you've worked at Bellini's for 2 years without missing a day, according to your manager. Because Professor Chen says you have more raw talent than any student he's taught in 30 years. He tapped the envelope. This isn't charity. It's removing artificial barriers to your potential. You'll pay it back by succeeding. Lily stared at the check, torn between pride and practicality. The amount represented freedom from financial stress for the first time in years. What's the catch? She asked finally. No catch, though I would like regular updates on your progress. And I'll expect tickets to your first major performance. The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. I enjoy being right about people. As Lily ate her pancakes, which were indeed excellent, they discussed practical details. The Young Artist program would begin in 3 weeks. She would need to give notice at Bellini's, finish her coursework, and find time to prepare a more extensive repertoire. There's one more thing, Blackwood said as they were finishing. The program includes access to a practice studio, but the pianos there are adequate, not exceptional. Real artists need proper tools. He handed her another envelope. Inside was a key and an address. It's a small apartment near the Symphony Center. The building is one of my properties. It has a Bosendorfer grand that's gathering dust. Use it until you find a permanent situation. Lily nearly dropped the key. A Bosendorfer was the Rolls-Royce of pianos. Even used, they cost as much as a house. Mr. Blackwood, this is too much. Thomas, he corrected. And it's an empty apartment with a piano nobody plays. Would you rather it sit unused? Put that way, it was hard to argue. Still, the speed at which her life was changing left her dizzy. As they parted in the hotel lobby, Blackwood shook her hand formally. Professor Chen speaks highly of your work ethic. Don't prove him wrong. I won't, she promised. Good. Because talent without discipline is worthless. I'll check in next month. With that, he was gone, leaving Lily standing in the grand hotel lobby clutching 2 envelopes that represented a complete change in her future. She walked to the L train in a daze, her mind racing. By the time she reached her stop, she had made a decision. She would accept Blackwood's help, but on her own terms. She would work harder than she ever had, prove herself worthy of this chance, and someday find a way to pay forward the opportunity she'd been given. Her apartment felt shabbier than usual when she returned. Zoe was still asleep, her bedroom door closed. Lily sat at their small kitchen table, examining the key to the apartment with the Bösendorfer. Curiosity overtook her. She grabbed her coat and headed back out. The address led her to an elegant older building in the heart of downtown near the lake. The doorman eyed her skeptically until she showed him the key and mentioned Blackwood's name. "Ah, yes." Mr. Blackwood called ahead. "Penthouse B, miss. Elevator is to your right. Penthouse." "Of course." The elevator opened directly into the apartment, a spacious, sun-filled space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan. The furniture was minimal but expensive, all clean lines and neutral colors. And in the center of the main room, bathed in natural light, stood the Bösendorfer. It was the most beautiful instrument Lily had ever seen. 9 feet of polished ebony, its lid raised like a massive black wing. She approached it reverently, running her fingers lightly over the keys without pressing them. Finally, she sat on the bench, adjusted it to her height, and began to play. The sound was extraordinary, rich and resonant with a depth her practice room pianos had never possessed. She lost herself in the music, playing through pieces she knew by heart, experimenting with dynamics that the instrument's sensitivity made possible. She didn't notice the passing of time until her phone buzzed. It was Professor Chen. "Lily, I've been trying to reach you all morning." Diane Reynolds called. "I know," Lily interrupted. "Blackwood told me everything over breakfast." "Professor, did you know he was going to pay my tuition?" A pause. "He mentioned wanting to help. I didn't know the details." "And this apartment?" "With the Bösendorfer?" Another hesitation. "That I didn't know about." "Lily, are you upset?" She looked around at the beautiful space, at the magnificent piano, and thought about the opportunities suddenly before her. "No," she said finally. "Not upset, just overwhelmed. Everything's changing so fast." "Change isn't always bad," the professor said gently. "Sometimes it's exactly what we need, even when it's frightening." After hanging up, Lily returned to the piano. As the afternoon light slanted through the windows, she played Rachmaninoff again, the piece that had changed her fortune. This time there was no audience to impress, no millionaire to challenge her. There was only the music, the instrument, and the possibilities stretching before her like the view of the endless lake. She played until her fingers ached, until the sun began to set over the water, casting golden light across the gleaming piano. Only then did she finally lock the apartment and head home, knowing she would return tomorrow and the day after, and every day until she had become the pianist she was meant to be. 3 months flew by like notes in a fast passage. Lily's life had transformed so completely that sometimes she woke up wondering if she had dreamed the whole thing. Her days, once filled with carrying plates and memorizing specials, now revolved around music. The Young Artist program was even more demanding than she had expected. 6 days a week she worked with top instructors from the Chicago Symphony, practiced for hours, attended master classes, and performed in small recitals. Her fellow musicians were intimidatingly talented, pianists who had been competing internationally since childhood, violinists who had played Carnegie Hall, cellists with perfect pitch. At first, Lily felt like an imposter among them. Unlike most, she hadn't attended a prestigious conservatory full-time or studied abroad. During introductions, when others spoke of their musical pedigrees, she simply said, "I worked my way through school." But when she played, those differences melted away. Her technique, honed through years of snatching practice time between shifts, was unorthodox but effective. And her interpretation, shaped by life experiences far removed from the privileged musical world, brought something fresh to even the most familiar pieces. Diane Reynolds, the program director, had taken a special interest in Lily. "You play like someone who understands that music is about life," she told her after a particularly moving rendition of a Schubert impromptu. "Too many young musicians play perfectly but say nothing." Lily had settled into a rhythm. Mornings were for technical practice at the studio provided by the program. Afternoons were for coaching and ensemble work. Evenings were reserved for the Bösendorfer in Blackwood's penthouse, where she worked on her own interpretations away from instructors' watchful eyes. The apartment had become her sanctuary, though she still kept her old place with Zoe, refusing to completely abandon her former life. She spent most nights on the simple futon bed she had installed in the penthouse's second bedroom. The closer she was to the piano, the more time she could spend playing. Blackwood himself remained a somewhat distant presence. True to his word, he checked in monthly, usually via brief phone calls. Occasionally, he would appear unannounced at a recital, sitting in the back, leaving before she could speak with him. Once, she had returned to the penthouse to find fresh flowers and a note. "Heard you played the list well. Keep pushing yourself." His methods were odd, but Lily had come to understand that his interest was genuine. He was investing in her future without trying to control it, a concept of patronage she had only read about in books about Renaissance artists. Today marked an important milestone. Her first formal recital as a featured soloist. The program had organized a showcase for major donors, and Diane had selected Lily to perform the centerpiece. It was an honor, but also tremendous pressure. These weren't just music lovers, they were potential sponsors, board members, and influential critics. As Lily practiced the Chopin Ballade one last time in her studio, there was a knock at the door. Professor Chen entered, beaming with pride. "I wouldn't miss your big night," he said, embracing her. "You look different." "New dress," Lily said, glancing down at the simple black concert dress she had finally been able to purchase for herself. "Not the dress. You. You stand taller now." She smiled. It was true. The constant fear of financial disaster that had hunched her shoulders for years had eased. She wasn't wealthy. The program's stipend covered only basic needs, but for the first time she could focus entirely on music. "Has Blackwood been here?" the professor asked, looking around the studio. Lily shook her head. "I haven't seen him in weeks. He might not come tonight." "He'll be there," Professor Chen said confidently. "He just doesn't want to distract you." They walked together to the small recital hall where the event would be held. Unlike the charity gala, this was a serious musical venue, designed for optimal acoustics. The Steinway waiting on stage had been specially selected and tuned for the evening's performances. Backstage, the atmosphere was tense. The 6 performers chosen for the showcase paced or sat in silent concentration. Lily found a quiet corner and closed her eyes, mentally playing through the ballad one more time. The piece told a story: passion, longing, despair, and ultimately transcendence. She had chosen it because it spoke to her own journey. 5 minutes, Ms. Wu," called the stage manager. Lily opened her eyes and took a deep breath. She smoothed her dress, checked her hair, and waited for her cue. As the previous performer, a brilliant young violinist, took her final bow, Lily felt a moment of panic. What if she failed? What if, after all Blackwood's investment and the program's faith in her, she froze as she had at the Wilton competition? But when her name was announced and she walked on stage, a strange calm settled over her. The lights were too bright to see individual faces, but she could make out Professor Chen in the 3rd row. And there in the back, a tall figure she recognized instantly: Blackwood, standing rather than sitting as if prepared for a quick exit. Lily took her seat at the piano, adjusted the bench, and placed her hands on the keys. Then she began. The opening notes floated out, deceptively simple. As the piece progressed, building in complexity and emotion, Lily fell into that rare state performers chase their entire lives: total immersion in the music. Her fingers seemed to move of their own accord, finding the perfect weight for each note, the exact timing for each phrase. When she struck the final chord, there was a moment of complete silence, that magical space between the end of a performance and the audience's reaction, when time itself seemed suspended. Then came the applause, enthusiastic, genuine, and sustained. Lily rose to take her bow, her heart racing. As her eyes adjusted to the lights, she could see people standing. Not everyone, but enough to signal that something special had happened. Backstage, Diane was waiting, her usually composed face alight with excitement. "Magnificent," she said, squeezing Lily's hands. "Absolutely magnificent. The donors are buzzing. Everyone wants to meet you at the reception." The next hour passed in a blur of handshakes and compliments. Wealthy patrons pressed business cards into her hand, promising to attend her future concerts. A critic from the Tribune asked for an interview. Professor Chen stood nearby, beaming like a proud father. Through it all, Lily kept scanning the crowd for Blackwood, but he was nowhere to be seen. Had he left immediately after her performance, as was his habit? As the reception wound down, Diane pulled her aside. "The board has made a decision," she said quietly. "We'd like you to represent the Young Artists program at the International Chopin competition in Warsaw next year." Lily stared at her in shock. The Chopin competition was one of the most prestigious piano competitions in the world. Simply being accepted to compete was a career milestone. "Are you serious?" "Completely. You'll need intensive preparation, of course. Specialized coaching, a broader repertoire. It will be the hardest year of your life," Diane smiled. "Are you ready for that?" "Yes," Lily said without hesitation. "Absolutely yes." Later, as she gathered her things to leave, she found a small box with her coat. Inside was an antique metronome, the kind used by pianists a century ago, and a note in familiar handwriting. "For timing the journey ahead. One step at a time." "TB," she smiled, tucking the gift carefully into her bag. Somehow Blackwood had known exactly what she would need. Not congratulations, but a reminder that the real work was just beginning. Outside, the Chicago night was clear and cold, stars visible despite the city lights. Lily decided to walk home, needing time to process everything that had happened. As she passed the restaurant where she had once worked, it felt like a lifetime ago. She paused, looking through the window at the servers rushing between tables, at the customers absorbed in their meals and conversations, at the silent piano in the corner that had started it all. On impulse, she went inside. The manager spotted her immediately, his eyes widening in recognition. "Lily, we've been hearing about you," he exclaimed, hurrying over. "A star now, aren't you? You must tell us all about it." He gestured toward an empty table. "Dinner on the house?" She shook her head, smiling. "Actually, I was wondering if I could play the piano for a few minutes." The manager looked surprised but delighted. "Of course, just like old times." But it wasn't like old times. As Lily sat at the modest upright piano, running her fingers over keys that were slightly out of tune, she realized how much had changed. Not just her circumstances, but herself. 3 months ago, she had played here because she was challenged, because she had no choice. Tonight, she played because she wanted to remember where she had started. She chose a simple Mozart sonata, letting the pure, uncomplicated melody fill the restaurant. Conversation stopped, servers paused with trays, and for a few minutes the ordinary evening was transformed. When she finished, there was the same appreciative applause she had received at the recital, though from a very different audience. As she stood to leave, a young waitress approached her. "That was beautiful," she said shyly. "I'm studying music too, but just part-time. It's hard with this job." Lily looked at her, really looked, and saw herself as she had been. Tired, hopeful, talented, struggling. She took out one of the business cards she had received at the reception. "Call this number tomorrow," she said, pressing it into the girl's hand. "Tell them Lily Wu suggested you for the community outreach program. They offer scholarships." The girl's eyes widened. "Really? Why would you?" "Because someone did it for me," Lily said simply. "And talent shouldn't be wasted carrying plates." As she walked back to her apartment, her real apartment where Zoe would be waiting to hear about her triumph, Lily felt a sense of completion. The circle that had begun with Blackwood's challenge was beginning to close, with her now able to extend opportunities to others. Her phone buzzed with a text. "Warsaw preparation begins Monday, 8 a.m. Rest this weekend." "You've earned it." TB Lily smiled. Rest could wait. She had a Bösendorfer waiting for her, and the Chopin competition pieces to start learning. One step at a time, just as Blackwood had said. But she would take those steps at her own pace, in her own way, playing her own music. The Warsaw Philharmonic Concert Hall buzzed with anticipation. After a grueling week of preliminary rounds, the International Chopin competition had narrowed 87 pianists from around the world down to just 12 finalists. Lily sat backstage, her hands warm in fingerless gloves, reviewing the score of Chopin's Piano Concerto No. 1 one last time. The past year had been the most intense of her life. Days stretched into nights as she prepared, not just for this competition, but for the career that would follow regardless of the outcome. The Young Artist program had provided everything they promised: world-class coaching, performance opportunities, and the crucial support that allowed her to focus entirely on music. Blackwood had kept his distance during this time, but his influence remained. Every few weeks, a package would arrive: Rare recordings of great pianists, books on music theory, once even a meticulously restored score of Chopin's manuscripts with the composer's own notations. Each came with the same brief note: for your consideration. TB Professor Chen had traveled to Warsaw with her, serving as her unofficial coach and much-needed emotional support. He sat with her now, his weathered hands resting calmly on his knees. "Are you nervous?" he asked. Lily laughed softly. "Terrified." "Good. The day you stop feeling nervous before performing is the day you should quit. It means you no longer care enough." A stagehand appeared. "Ms. Wu, 5 minutes." Professor Chen squeezed her shoulder. "Remember what we discussed? This piece is a conversation between pianist and orchestra. Listen as much as you play." Lily nodded, removing her gloves and flexing her fingers. As the stagehand led her toward the stage, she caught a glimpse of the audience through a gap in the curtains. The hall was packed, every seat filled. Somewhere out there sat some of the world's foremost piano experts, ready to judge every note, every nuance of her performance. She had come so far from the restaurant with its out-of-tune upright piano. In just over a year, she had transformed from a waitress who played piano to a pianist on one of classical music's biggest stages. The thought both terrified and exhilarated her. The concerto she was about to perform was a monumental work, technically challenging and emotionally complex. She had lived with this music for months, practicing each passage until her fingers could play it in her sleep, studying Chopin's life to understand the emotions behind the notes. "Ms. Wu, we're ready for you." Taking a deep breath, Lily walked onto the stage. The lights were blinding, the applause thunderous. She made her way to the gleaming concert grand, bowed to the audience, then to the conductor, and took her seat. In the moment before the orchestra began, she scanned the hall, not really expecting to see any familiar faces besides Professor Chen's. But there, in a box seat to the right of the stage, sat Blackwood. He wasn't supposed to be here. He had told her business would prevent his attendance. Yet there he was, as still and focused as a statue, watching her. Their eyes met briefly across the distance, and he gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. Not a gesture of encouragement or reassurance, but of acknowledgement, one professional to another. In that moment, Lily realized he no longer saw her as a project or an investment. She was a musician, worthy of respect on her own terms. The conductor raised his baton. The orchestra began the long introduction to the concerto, building the musical foundation upon which her part would soon rise. Lily's hands hovered over the keys, waiting for her entrance. When it came, she was ready. Her first notes rang out clear and confident, establishing her voice in the musical conversation. What followed was not just a performance, but a journey, through technical passages that once would have seemed impossible, through emotional depth she had only begun to explore when she first encountered this piece. The second movement, with its introspective nocturne-like quality, had always spoken to her most strongly. As she played its delicate, yearning melody, Lily thought of her journey, the long hours at Bellini's, the chance encounter with Blackwood, the months of intensive work that had led to this moment. Each experience had shaped her playing, adding depth and authenticity to her interpretation. In the final movement, with its dance-like rhythms and virtuosic passages, Lily felt a freedom she had rarely experienced in performance. This was why she played music, not for competitions or acclaim, but for these transcendent moments when artist, instrument, and composition became one. When the final notes faded, there was a heartbeat of silence before the applause began. It started slowly, then built to a roaring wave that washed over her as she stood to bow. She caught glimpses of faces in the audience, some moved to tears, others smiling in appreciation. The orchestra members behind her tapped their bows against their instruments in their own sign of approval. Backstage, Professor Chen waited, his eyes glistening. "You played as I always knew you could," he said simply, embracing her. The remaining finalists performed throughout the day, each bringing their own interpretation to Chopin's music. Lily listened to as many as she could, in awe of the talent surrounding her. By evening, all 12 had performed, and the jury retired to deliberate. Results wouldn't be announced until the following day. Traditionally, finalists gathered for dinner, but Lily was too exhausted, her emotions too raw. She returned to her hotel room, intending to rest when there was a knock at her door. It was Blackwood, still in his concert attire. "May I come in?" She stepped aside, surprised by his presence. "I thought you couldn't make it to Warsaw." "Plans change." He remained standing, formal as always. "You played well today." Coming from him, it was high praise indeed. "Thank you. For coming and for everything else." He shook his head slightly. "You did the work. I merely removed obstacles." "That's not true. You saw something in me that night at the restaurant. Something I wasn't even sure was there anymore. I recognized ability and determination, the same qualities that helped me succeed in business." He glanced around the modest hotel room. "You know, regardless of tomorrow's results, your life has changed permanently." "I know," Lily said. "I've been thinking about that a lot lately." "And?" She considered her answer carefully. "I'm grateful, but I'm also ready to stand on my own. The Young Artist program ends next month. After that, I need to make my own way." Blackwood nodded, a hint of approval in his eyes. "That's why I came today. To give you this." He handed her an envelope. Inside was not a check, as she had half expected, but a contract from one of the world's premier classical music labels, offering her a recording deal. "How did you—" "I didn't," he interrupted. "They approached me after hearing about your performances here. I'm merely the messenger." Lily scanned the document, stunned by the opportunity it represented. "This is incredible." "It's a beginning," Blackwood said. "Your beginning. No more safety nets, no more special arrangements. Just your talent and hard work from here on out." There was finality in his tone that made Lily look up sharply. "Are you saying goodbye, Mr. Blackwood?" A faint smile crossed his face. "Thomas," he corrected as he had that first morning at breakfast. "And no, not goodbye. But my role in your story is coming to its natural conclusion. You don't need a patron anymore. You need a friend." For the first time in their acquaintance, he extended his hand to shake hers. The gesture was deeply meaningful, an acknowledgement that they were now equals in their respective fields. "I would be honored to have you as a friend," Lily said, shaking his hand firmly. The next day, the competition results were announced in a ceremony televised throughout Europe. Lily Wu, the former waitress from Chicago, was awarded second prize, an extraordinary achievement for an American pianist at this historically European-dominated competition. As she accepted her medal and the enthusiastic applause of the audience, Lily spotted both Professor Chen and Blackwood standing together at the back of the hall. The old teacher was openly weeping with joy, while the businessman maintained his usual reserve. But when she caught his eye, he gave her a genuine smile, perhaps the first she had ever seen from him. The months that followed were a whirlwind. The recording contract led to her debut album of Chopin works. Concert invitations flooded in from around the world. Critics praised her authentic voice and remarkable emotional depth. Through it all, Lily maintained her connection to where she had begun. She established a scholarship for working musicians, helping others who, like her, had talent but lacked resources. Each year she performed a free concert at Bellini's, which now proudly advertised itself as where it all began. Professor Chen continued to advise her, though now as a colleague rather than a teacher. And Blackwood? True to his word, he stepped back from the role of patron, but occasionally they met for coffee when she performed in Chicago. He never offered advice unless asked, never took credit for her success, but she knew he followed her career closely. 5 years after that fateful night at Bellini's, Lily returned to the restaurant for her annual concert. The place had changed, renovated and expanded with a proper stage where the piano now stood. The crowd was a mix of regular customers, music students, and classical music fans who had heard about the tradition. As she sat at the piano, a new Steinway that Bellini's had purchased to replace the old upright, Lily thought about how far she had come, and the unlikely challenge that had started it all. "Tonight," she announced to the audience, "I'd like to play a piece I've never performed here before. It's the first work I ever played for someone who saw potential in me when I was just a waitress carrying plates." She began to play Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, the same piece she had performed for Blackwood that first night. But now, enriched by years of study and experience, her interpretation had new depths, new insights, new maturity. From his table in the corner, Blackwood listened. His usually impassive face softened with something like pride, not the pride of ownership or investment, but the quiet satisfaction of having recognized something valuable and helped it flourish. When she finished, before the applause began, Their eyes met across the crowded restaurant. In that moment of connection, both knew the circle was complete. The waitress challenged to play piano had become the pianist who now challenged others to listen deeply, to support talent wherever it might be found, and to remember that sometimes extraordinary abilities hide in the most ordinary places, waiting only for someone to notice.